A forensic blood spatter analyst who spent 8 seasons inside a Miami police department, building a system so clean that the detective sitting 10 feet away never got close. Against a man who walked into conflict after conflict with criminal organization, law enforcement, and private military contractors, and kept walking out the other side. Showtime's Dexter ran from 2006 to 2013. Marvel's Punisher first appeared in print in February of 1974. Amazing Spider-Man issue 129, created by Gary Conway, Ross Andru, and John Romita Sr., the Netflix version of Frank Castle ran across Daredevil Season 2 in 2016, and his own 2-season show from 2017 to 2019, played by John Bernthal. Everything in this breakdown draws from the Netflix version of Frank Castle only. The important thing to understand about the Netflix Punisher is this: Frank Castle has never once needed a controlled environment to operate. That tells you everything about what is coming. Dexter's system performs best when he controls the environment. The question is how often he can actually achieve that against a target with Frank Castle's background, and what happens when he cannot. Dexter Morgan was a forensic blood spatter analyst at Miami Metro PD. His method had a defined sequence he held to across all 8 seasons. First, he gathered evidence on a target, pulling case file, crime scene data, and physical evidence through his legitimate access to the department's resource. Then, he surveilled the target long enough to find a pattern he could exploit. Then he closed the gap with a syringe loaded with etterphine, also called M99, a sedative powerful enough to drop a person almost instantly. After that came the kill room, plastic sheeting, a fixed table, a controlled space he had prepared in advance. He took a blood slide from every victim as a trophy and disposed of bodies in the ocean to eliminate forensic evidence. This is also Dexter's greatest single strength. He is a patient hunter. He does not rush. He spends weeks, sometimes months, building a picture of a target before he makes a move. Against most of the people he went after, that preparation was the decisive factor. Not physical force, not weapons, but the time he spent understanding someone's patterns before they knew he existed. Frank Castle in the Netflix series was a Marine Force Recon veteran who served multiple combat tours before his family was killed. Force Recon Marines operate ahead of the main force. Their job is to go into hostile environments without support and operate without being detected. That background makes Dexter's preferred approach significantly more difficult. Not impossible. Everyone can be ambushed under the right conditions. But Frank's training means he reads environments and closing distances in ways most of Dexter's previous targets never did. Dexter's greatest asset against Castle would be exactly what it was against everyone else: preparation. If Dexter spent long enough watching Castle's patterns, learning his safe houses, understanding his routines, he builds a window. That window is narrower than it would be against a civilian target, but Dexter has built windows in harder places than most people would expect. The complication is that Frank often creates his own exposure. He operates aggressively. He willingly places himself in dangerous situations. He does not hide between engagements the way someone trying to avoid attention would. That aggression creates openings for a patient hunter, and Dexter is nothing if not patient. Dexter's method is not broken against Castle. It is significantly harder to execute. The preparation advantage is real. The execution window is smaller and riskier than anything Dexter faced in 8 seasons of the show. The method is one piece of this. The next section is about what happens when the setup does not go cleanly, and what each man brings into that situation. Dexter is dangerous in close quarters. He has proven that repeatedly. Frank Castle possesses far greater combat training, and that gap becomes decisive if the confrontation moves into open territory. Dexter is not the unarmed man this comparison sometimes gets treated as. He beat James Dokes across multiple confrontations during Season 2. He defeated his brother Brian Moser. He overpowered Miguel Prado, Travis Marshall, and Arthur Mitchell. And Mitchell, the Trinity Killer, was one of the most physically capable antagonists the show ever produced. Dexter ultimately killed Trinity. He also killed Oliver Saxon in Season 8 with a pen in a hospital room, under surveillance with a correctional officer standing outside. That is not the behavior of someone who falls apart when a plan changes. What Dexter does not have is combat training at Frank Castle's level. In Daredevil Season 2, Frank was able to challenge Daredevil in direct physical confrontation, a man whose entire adult life had been spent training in martial arts under some of the most demanding teachers in the Marvel Universe. Frank did not win that fight cleanly, but he was in it. In his own Netflix series, he survived multiple gunshot wounds across both seasons, prolonged torture sequences, and fought through rooms full of armed men in ways that require both tactical planning and raw durability. The gap between these two men in open physical confrontation is real and significant, but it only becomes fully decisive if the confrontation reaches that stage, and Dexter's entire system is built to prevent that from happening. The honest version of this section is, if Frank forces the confrontation into the open, Dexter is at a serious disadvantage. If Dexter controls the terms of engagement, the combat gap matters much less. Dexter remains dangerous in close quarters. Frank Castle possesses a level of combat experience and physical toughness that Dexter has not faced before. In a direct confrontation on open terms, the advantage goes to Frank decisively. That covers what happens in the room. What comes next is about the environment both men operate inside, and why the city they share becomes a problem for exactly one of them. If this kind of breakdown is what you came for, subscribe. We go further into these comparisons than most channels try. Dexter's cover is a genuine strategic asset that gives him real advantages before any confrontation begins. It also creates a vulnerability that Frank Castle, who operates without any equivalent cover, does not share. Dexter's cover was built over years inside Miami Metro PD, 8 seasons surrounded by homicide detectives whose entire professional purpose was to find killers. Sergeant James Dokes suspected him for years and could never close the gap because Dexter's forensic knowledge let him stay exactly one step ahead of what the department could prove. Frank Lundy, one of the FBI's most experienced serial killer hunters, investigated the Bay Harbor Butcher case in Season 2 and came close. But the evidence trail Dexter left never added up to a complete picture. Lieutenant Maria LaGuerta reopened the bloodslide case in Season 7 and came closer than anyone. That cover gives Dexter something valuable in a matchup with Castle. He has access to law enforcement database, case files, and forensic resources that most people hunting Castle would not have. He can monitor what the department knows about Castle's movements, pull information on his known associates, and operate with an understanding of where Castle has been and what pattern is emerging, all without raising any suspicion about why he is looking. Frank Castle in the Netflix show does not have a cover. His identity as the Punisher was established publicly through a trial in Daredevil Season 2 that was covered by the press. By the time his own series started, the NYPD, the FBI, and Homeland Security were all actively looking for him. The risk this creates for Dexter is real. Frank operates in a way that generates a high volume of crime scene evidence, bullets, shell casing, bodies left in the open, scenes that do not require forensic processing to understand. Those scenes would land on Miami Metro as active cases. Dexter would be working them. That is not necessarily a disaster for it could actually feed his preparation, but it does mean that he is operating in a higher noise environment than usual, with less control over what his department focuses on. Whether Frank's operating style would actually collapse Dexter's cover depends entirely on whether Frank ever identified Dexter as a threat to him. There is no reason in either show's narrative that he would. They move in different worlds. The cover problem only becomes real if the confrontation begins. Dexter's cover is a genuine asset, not a liability. His forensic access and police positioning give him preparation advantages Castle cannot match. The vulnerability is real, but conditional. It activates only if the confrontation starts and Frank begins to connect the dots. That covers the environment. The last section is the one where this comparison comes down to something specific, what each man's code allows him to do, and what it stops him from doing. The Code of Harry is what made Dexter Morgan work as a character for 8 seasons. In a direct matchup with Frank Castle, it is also a constraint that Castle does not share, and constraints, in a fight, are liabilities. Harry Morgan built the code around specific rules. Only kill people who have committed murder and escape justice. Never leave evidence. Never let anyone get close enough to threaten the cover. Every kill had to be researched, verified, and executed in a controlled environment. The code was not just a moral structure, it was a survival strategy. Staying inside those lines kept Dexter's behavior predictable enough that he could manage the risk of operating inside a police department. Frank Castle arguably qualifies under Dexter's code, though reasonable viewers could disagree. He kills people, he operates outside the law, he has evaded authorities for years. The case that he qualifies is real. The complication is that verifying it to the standard Dexter requires takes time, and Castle's operating style does not give Dexter the kind of stable observation window he usually builds a case from. Frank follows a looser code than Dexter, but still operates with rules. He avoids harming innocents whenever possible. His targets are consistently criminal organizations, people who ordered killings, and people running illegal operations. He draws lines. They just move based on what the situation required. He has put Daredevil in a position where Castle was prepared to shoot him if he kept interfering, while simultaneously acknowledging that Daredevil was trying to do good. That is a man with a code, not a man without one. The asymmetry here is specific. Dexter's code requires him to stop and verify before acting. Castle does not require the same pause. In a situation where both men are aware of each other and time matters, that difference in response speed is meaningful. Dexter's path to winning this requires patience, preparation, surveillance, and a successful ambush on terms he controlled. Frank's path to winning requires surviving long enough to identify the threat and force a direct confrontation. Given how aggressively Castle operates, and how often he deliberately puts himself in danger, the confrontation that Frank's approach produces is exactly the kind Dexter's system was built to avoid. The code is not a fatal weakness. It is a structural constraint that slows Dexter's response and requires more certainty before he acts. Castle does not operate under the same requirement. In a prolonged engagement where both men know about each other, that asymmetry matters. Now, drop a comment below. Does Dexter get the ambush off, or does Frank force the confrontation first? Make the case. The preparation gap cuts both ways. Dexter's forensic access gives him intelligence advantages that Frank's enemies rarely have. Frank's aggression creates exposure that a patient hunter can read. Neither man enters this matchup blind, but one of them spends more time building the picture before moving. Most of Frank Castle's enemies in the Netflix series came at him with speed and force. The Kitchen Irish, the Cartel, the Dogs of Hell. All three organizations hid his family and then spent the rest of season 1 trying to find him and finish what they started. They had manpower, resources, and motive. None of them spent time trying to understand his patterns before engaging. That approach failed badly. Dexter has never worked that way. The research phase is not something he does because he has to. It is how he keeps the code intact and keeps himself safe. He watched Trinity for weeks before making a move, mapping Arthur Mitchell's schedule down to the specific days he used for each part of his ritual. He tracked Miguel Prado's movements carefully enough to understand exactly when and where a window would open. The research is part of Dexter's process that most of his opponents never knew was happening, because by the time they were aware of him, it was already done. Against Castle, that research phase is harder. Frank moves. He does not have a stable home address, a predictable work schedule, or a family routine to map, but he does have patterns. He targets specific types of organization. He returns to people he trusts. Curtis Hoyle in season 1, David Lieberman throughout. He operates within a geography. A patient analyst with police database access and forensic resources could build a picture over time. The wrinkle is that Frank's aggression creates visible evidence trails that Dexter can follow from inside the department. Every scene Frank leaves behind is data. Dexter would be among the people processing it. Whether that preparation window stays open long enough is the real question. Frank does not stay still, and Dexter has never had to build a window on someone moving this fast. The preparation advantage is real and meaningful. It is also operating under tighter time pressure than anything in the show prepared Dexter for. Both factors are true at the same time. Over 100 confirmed kills across the series. A system built on preparation, patience, and forensic precision. A cover so well constructed that the people sitting around him for 8 years never assembled a complete picture. Dexter Morgan was one of the television's most carefully designed characters, and what Harry built for him held together through sustained pressure that would have destroyed a less disciplined person. Frank Castle is not a more careful version of Dexter. He is not operating in the same category of threat. He is a Force Recon combat veteran with no secret to protect, far greater combat training and durability, and a code that allows faster response than Dexter's required. Dexter's path to victory is real. It runs through preparation, weeks of surveillance, forensic access, patient construction of a window that Castle's own aggressive operating style might actually help create. Dexter has built harder windows than most people expect. If he gets the ambush off on terms he controls, the outcome is not decided by combat at all. Frank's path to victory runs through surviving long enough to force the confrontation into the open. He is better equipped for that confrontation than anything Dexter has faced before. He has spent years fighting heavily armed opponents in open engagements and walking out. He is trained specifically to notice the kind of approach Dexter's method depends on. Dexter can win. The preparation advantage is genuine. The forensic access is real. The patience is something most of Frank's enemies have never brought to a fight with him. Frank Castle wins more often, because the moment the ambush fails and the confrontation goes open, The gap in combat training, physical durability, and operational experience closes around Dexter in a way that he has never had to survive before. If this breakdown changed how you see either one of these characters, subscribe and hit the bell, because the next one goes even deeper into what happens when the wrong system meets the wrong threat.